Hi guys, Brian here. We have another instructable for you today. It's gonna be on how to make a needle.
Here we are with the next section of the sewing kit, and this part is going to be making the needle. Our kit is going to include the materials to make yourself a couple of antler needles, and those materials are going to be nice little slivers of antler or bone and a little laser cut file that has the smooth side and rougher side. So for large antler removal, we'll use the rougher side, and then on the final sharpening and shaping, we'll use the smoother side. This is going to be really straightforward. It's going to be a little bit longer than we're going to want our needle, and that makes it a lot easier to have a handle. We'll make our needle by scraping it away, sharpening this point right here, shaping it, and then after we get most of the needle done, we can then cut it off, round the back side of it, and put a nice little groove in or a little hole in. It all depends on what kind of back we want to shape. So there's a lot of different ways you can make needles. There's also all kinds of needles. There's needles for sewing grass, for stitching leather, for crocheting, knitting, then all kinds of other stuff. So we're gonna go with the very basic, classic needle shape that everybody kind of pictures when they picture a needle. So let's get started. We'll just take our rough side, and we'll take the skinny side here, and we'll try to slowly just start shaping it out. And we don't wanna go too far back and forth when it's this thin, because then you could snap it more. You'll want to make sure you kind of do it long ways along the length of the needle. That'll get you a lot more force behind it, enabling you to remove more material. And just keep working it around in a circle. Try to get it even in thickness first. So working it around. As soon as I turn it to its side or on its corners, I want to be a little more careful and a little more careful. And now, as I'm getting closer to a point here and closer to a nice, consistent, even needle shape, I'm going to switch over to my smoother side, my finer grit, and I'm going to continue doing the exact same thing. And now I'm going to try to support the needle a little bit more by putting my finger a little closer to the tip and try not to sand my finger too much, but you know, that's the name of the game when you're working on such fine materials, fine needles. Bigger needles, a lot easier to not have to worry about, you know, smoothing your own finger, but it's not the worst thing in the world. So we'll just keep it going, and as I'm getting closer and closer to that final shape, I'll save sharpening my tip for last, so I'm not accidentally poking myself while I'm trying to, you know, shape the back and everything. So we'll just leave it mostly right like this, right? I've got a little bit thicker right in the middle of where the needle will be. If I'm cutting it off where my fingers are, I've got a nice thickness here, and then it flattens out a tiny little bit towards the back. And that can be a little nicer because I'll have the same amount of antler material as in the back as I do in the middle, but because it's flattened out and spread out just a tiny bit more, that makes it a little more conducive to grooving my little tiny hole in it. So that'll have enough material around both sides, so they won't want to snap as easy. One thing I'll say about the antler needles, they are not metal needles. They work really well if you use them correctly. Our sewing kits will come equipped with an awl. Many times punching the hole with the awl and then taking your needle with thread and using it as a guide to feed through those holes are where the antler needles really shine. This is primarily for like leather work, because leather can be a little bit tougher. If you're doing like grass stitching, say you're coiling baskets, or you're doing netting needles, or you're you know, sewing in and out of grass mats or whichever, you'll have different size needles and you can just sew those right through, no problem. The leather is where if you need a really fine needle, it's nicer to have an awl that you can punch the holes first, and then the needle guides through, pulls the string through. So we've got this mostly finished, so we're gonna go ahead and cut it off. You can literally, when it's this thin, you can basically get it right with your fingers and snap it right in half. And that'll also help you get an idea on what kind of tensile strength the antler will take. And depending on if you use the inside core of an antler or the outside core of an antler or bone, that's going to have different components to it. If you use an antler that was found on the ground that's deteriorated a little bit more, that's going to be a little bit weaker than an antler that has been harvested fresh or freshly dropped. So it's going to be for you to discern the quality of the antler or bone or any material that you're working with to make your needles. You want the highest quality materials for the finest needles. The bigger and fatter your needles are, the less discerning you have to be on what kind of material you're using. So I've snapped off the back. I'm just rounding it off. It doesn't have to be too rounded. I just don't want it to have much sharp points, and you can flatten it a little bit, but really, we just need something that's not gonna be like a little sharp edge. So that's nice, it's smoothed out. I'm gonna straighten it out just a little bit to make it a little more uniform with the rest of the needle. We'll look at the back of it, the nice flat side, and we can either put a hole in it, we can put a little groove down going reverse. That's something that can just like pull string through and hook into it, but we'll do the traditional nice little hole. We'll want to go not too close to the back so it doesn't snap off so easily, and we don't really need to make our hole too long. The big thing we don't want to do is we don't want to make the hole very wide. We want to make it just wide enough to be able to take the kind of string that we're putting into it. Because the wider you go with your hole, the closer it gets to the sides, and the easier it will snap off if you're trying to pull the string through. So we will drill this little hole. One really simple way is if you have a knife, a very fine point, you can drill it. With your awl, you can literally take your awl and you can just start scratching a line back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and just sit there and keep scratching it. And as you scratch it, the little edges, it starts to go down further and further and further. You want to be really controlled with this. So this is what's really nice if you've got a nice wide and thin back, or you just haven't made it super thick. It's really helpful for getting this through. You can also take a very tiny little itty bitty drill bit and do the easy thing, drill it right through it. We can also use something like a little stone flake that we have, and we'll put one of these little flakes in each kit. These are nice for cutting strings and whatnot, very traditional use. For these little guys has always been engraving also. So just like we were doing with the awl, you just kind of take your edge and just start scratching into the back of that needle and just keep removing more material and more material in the same straight line. Little itty bitty small tiny movements. Flip it over, start your backside, and just start your line and keep engraving the same spot over and over and over, and it will go down, and eventually your 2 points will meet. We also have another traditional tool, the pump drill. Pump drill is a really sweet little tool that you can use stone bits, you can use metal bits, but it rotates. As you push it down, the angle of the string spins the spindle here, and then as you release pressure and hold on to it, it wraps itself back up, just like this. So it takes a little bit of subtlety getting used to, but as you can see, it does a pretty good job at drilling holes. We can also take this one, get it right in that edge, and you can even spin it with your fingers first just to get it started, just so you're not bouncing all over the place. And get it nice and lined up, and go very soft at first. So we'll even spin it up with our hands, just go very soft, and if it falls off, that's great. Just put it back on, The most important part is that you get it to where you need it and that you go real slow. Now I've gone in just a little bit. I don't want to go in too much deeper because I want to meet it from the other side. If you try to go in too deep from one side, you'll make that side really wide, and then the grooving will get really wide on that side, and then it won't be very wide on the other side. You want nice even depth coming from both sides. And we have busted through. Very nice, very nice. Very nice little pump drill. So we've got a nice little, perfect little hole drilled right into it. So if we're feeling comfortable about how much antler is on both sides of that hole, we can shave the back down even more. Round it out. We just don't want it too thin, but if we make it, the thinner that we make it, it'll be able to pull the string through the holes that we create. And after you get close to the end there, then you can go back and work on the rest of your needle, straightening it out, getting it nicer, and then start working the tip. Just really nice and consistent angle, just dragging it back and forth. And as you get closer and closer towards the tip, you can angle it up. You can angle your back up just a little bit more, and then do a few swipes backwards and rotate your needle as you're doing it. And that will sharpen our tip to the point where we should be able to even punch it through leather if we need to. This is a very thin needle, so we have to know what our limitations are. But with a good thin needle, we should be able to at least punch the tip through the leather. But this is where you run the risk of snapping your needle. If you're trying to force this thing through leather all the way, you have to keep making sure you're only pushing from really close to the end. That is why it is super useful for these awls. You know, traditionally, the awls were used quite a bit more because, one, they're a thicker material, and even if this was antler and not metal, you'd have a much easier time punching your holes first and making it a little bit wider so that when you send your needle through, your needle has a much easier time going through. So this is why our sewing kit has multiple different tools inside of it, because some of them complement each other. So this is our basic needle design, and we're going to leave you guys with multiple pieces of antler so you can make different sizes and different styles, and that'll be totally it'll be a really cool and totally cool kit when you're all done with all of them. So yeah, it'll be the coolest sewing kits on the block.